Hello, testing. Hi, everyone.
Kenapa nampak yang biasa? Kenapa macam dah ubah je? Ke somebody, I think kot.
Okay, hold on.
Semua
Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Oh, semua kena mute.
Okay, so we have about 122 participants in Zoom this morning, and I believe the numbers on YouTube is about 70 viewers. That's out of 300 registered participants. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in to the virtual event, Human Rights Day 2020. We shall begin in a few minutes. I'm waiting for my cue. So yeah. Just mic test. Can everybody hear me clearly? Yeah. All right. Thank you. It will also be great for all the participants to rename username to your actual names. So it will ease our organizer to identify the participants and address you properly. Thank you. And we have about 4 minutes. We will start the event at 9:15. Hundred and 34 participants. 9:15.
Another 2 minutes.
Another 2 minutes, and we will begin the event.
Uh, oh, Hafiz. Dia punya Dia ready. Boleh.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and a very good morning to all of you. Today, we join the international community to celebrate Human Rights Day, observed every year on 10 December. And we are indeed delighted that all of you are here this morning. This year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is proud to once again collaborate with the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, the National Human Rights Commission, SUHAKAM, and United Nations in Malaysia to organize the Human Rights Day virtual forum with the theme, Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. This year's theme, Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights, relates to the need to place human rights at the heart of the recovery efforts, especially with the pandemic. The forum allows all stakeholders to reaffirm the importance of human rights and explore best practices in moving ahead and rebuilding together. By advancing the human rights agenda, we can recover better and build a world that is more resilient, just, and sustainable. Okay, to begin this morning's program, I have the honor to invite Tan Sri Othman Hashim, Chairman of SUHAKAM, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Hishamuddin Hussein, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yang Berhormat Datuk Taqiyuddin bin Hassan, Minister in Prime Minister's Department. His Excellency Stefan Bresner, UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum and good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the virtual International Human Rights Forum 2020 with the theme Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. Human Rights Day is observed every year on 10th December to commemorate the adoption of the Universal Declarations of Human Rights, UDHR, by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. The world had welcomed the new decade with much anticipation and hope. But we now know that 2020 has brought upon us a different reality. The COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be a major challenge for humankind. In addition to the loss of an exceptionally high number of human lives, the pandemic has led to lives being turned upside down, economies disrupted, and the globalized world as we knew it stopped in its track. The nation saw the impositions of the Movement Control Order, MCO, since 18 March, adjusted accordingly to deal with the situation as the weeks and months went by. The government has largely been quite successful in managing the crisis, even as we are today, still deep in the third wave of the pandemic. While it was acknowledged that various actions taken by the authorities to stem the pandemic were necessary in terms of public health response, there had been some hits and some misses in terms of its impact on people. The government's response to contain the pandemic, however, raises new challenges to SUHAKAM with respect to its statutory mandate and functions. Our complaints and monitoring functions were impacted. Access to detention centers and prisons have been severely restricted. The MCO and health concerns have also impacted on the way we engage with others. SUHAKAM adjusted its working methods to be able to remain accessible to the public. We carried out our mandate. SUHAKAM conducted a series of needs assessment consultations in the early months of the pandemic, sought to gather information in order to advocate for and seek solutions to the problem that were faced. The consultations with different community groups and civil society organizations received excellent response and was well attended by representatives from the targeted communities or those serving the communities. The consultations brought to light the unfortunate negative impact of the restrictions on everyone, disproportionately affecting indigenous people, people in the rural areas, women and children, urban poor, refugees and asylum seekers, and migrant workers. There was overall consensus that the restrictions imposed had deprived the marginalized and vulnerable communities access to work, food, and nutrition, healthcare, and shelter due to their dependency on daily wages, lack of savings, and security nets to tide them through the period. Communities already vulnerable due to inadequate supportive policies and programs, even in normal circumstances, had been amplified in such a dire situations. Certain segments of the population have also not benefited from the special stimulus and aid packages provided by the government. These were further compounded by the restrictions placed upon the movement and operations of NGOs and CSOs and agencies that usually extend aid and assistance, were unable or faced additional challenges in reaching out to their beneficiaries. SUHAKAM had officially communicated with the relevant ministries to recommend possible solutions to the issues raised, including the provisions of subsistence and financial aid and healthcare services to the indigenous and homeless communities, whilst reminding the authorities to avoid actions that will further discriminate against migrants and refugees who were already living under duress. The authorities should establish additional targeted policies to protect women against gender-based violence and to ensure arrangements are made to safeguard children's access to education was not disrupted and availability of dedicated helplines for children to call in. SUHAKAM also urgently called for the government to release prisoners or persons being detained for minor crimes or those who were close to the end of their prison terms in order to relieve the overcrowding in prisons nationwide. Where appropriate, SUHAKAM had fully utilized its media reach and influence to guide and persuade the public to change perceptions, which may in itself bring about positive changes as to how society perceive and treat these communities. Unfortunately, human rights work is not categorized as essential services. Hence, SUHAKAM, as it was for the majority of the population in the first 3 months of the pandemic, had to operate on work from home mode. We were forced to review and adjust the delivery of our programs and activities. In the midst of that, SUHAKAM has sent a delegation to monitor the Sabah State campaign and election day processes in September to see to an election that was fair, transparent, and accurate. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the government's ongoing efforts to tame the pandemic, SUHAKAM had continued to monitor the situations, drawing attention to and engaging with authorities to protect non-derogable human rights, whilst ensuring that other rights were not taken for granted or unreasonably trampled under the guise of the pandemic response. As per Article 4 of the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, quote, states can never derogate the rights to life, prohibition of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, prohibitions of slavery and servitude, and principles of legality in criminal laws, and freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, even in exceptional situations such as the current pandemic. Legitimate derogations should be limited to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation and should not involve any discriminations on the ground of race, color, sex, language, religion, or social origin. Article 4(1), unquote. According to the General Comment 3 of the International Covenants on Social, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, states should ensure minimum levels of essential food and nutrition, freedom from hunger, primary healthcare, basic shelter and housing, including clean water and sanitation, and the right not to be arbitrarily evicted from one's house. Given the extent and urgency of the deprivations faced by vulnerable communities in this challenging time, SUHAKAM shall continue to engage with relevant stakeholders and promote for basic rights to be protected and provided for everyone in Malaysia, including the response and recovery phase of the pandemic crisis. The pandemic reminded us that we are all vulnerable to the same virus, regardless of background, status, race, or nationality. And the only definite way to overcome the virus and accompanying problems was for us to take care of one another. Kita jaga kita has been the rallying cry for fellow Malaysians for the past 9 months. The human rights approach is ever more relevant today as we work to rebuild our lives, reclaim our livelihoods, empower communities, and resume development of our nations once again. Ladies and gentlemen, SUHAKAM renews its commitment to facilitate the promotion and protection of human rights towards the realizations of the SDGs theme of leaving no one behind, and Malaysia's 2030 shared prosperity visions, which aims to bridge the income and wealth gaps between economic classes, ethnic groups, and geographical territories. We are supportive of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, ACRF, adopted at the 37th ASEAN Summit last November, attesting that recovery is about overcoming the virus, as well as enabling ASEAN to bounce back better and build a resilient future. It clearly demonstrates ASEAN member states' recognition that addressing the crisis requires coordinated actions, not only within the region, but as well as cooperation with its partners. We are also encouraged by the recently concluded 31st APEC Ministerial Meeting 2020 Joint Statement, identifying 3 priority areas with a call to enhance the region's human security agenda in order to recover from the COVID-19 and promote resilient and secure growth. SUHAKAM stands ready to support and cooperate in the implementations of both ACRF and APEC Ministerial Meeting 2020 Joint Statement in promoting the enjoyment of human rights by every single person and for all times. In response to the urgency and depth of recent issues, SUHAKAM had developed its 5-year strategic plan for the period 2021-2025. SUHAKAM will focus on the promotion, protection, and advocacy for economic, social and cultural rights of vulnerable communities, as well as to address racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia in the country. SUHAKAM, with the support and cooperation from the EU Delegation Office in Kuala Lumpur, will be involved in humanitarian aid programs for grassroots community organizations, as well as provide capacity building and reskilling training for those whom have been hard hit by the pandemic. On behalf of SUHAKAM, I wish to express our gratitude to each and every single personnel on the front line who have been tirelessly and selflessly carrying out their duties and responsibilities battling this pandemic for the most part of 2020 and the months to come. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. In conclusion, on behalf of SUHAKAM and co-organizers of this forum, I wish to thank everyone who are joining us virtually online for honoring us with your presence and participation, albeit in a modified form. Finally, I would like to express our gratitude to the Legal Affairs Divisions of the Prime Minister's Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the United Nations Office in Malaysia as partners in organizing this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tan Sri. Thank you so much, Tan Sri. It gives me great pleasure now to invite Mr. Stefan Presner, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, to deliver his opening address.
Good morning and happy Human Rights Day, and I hope you're all safe and well in these difficult times. Yang Berhad Datuk Sri Hishamuddin Hussein, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Berhad Datuk Taqiyuddin B. Hassan, Parliament and Law Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Othman Hashim, the Chairman of SUHAKAM, Excellencies, esteemed moderators and speakers, my dear UN colleagues, distinguished participants. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to this joint commemoration of Human Rights Day 2020, which is being organized virtually during these difficult times for obvious reasons with our esteemed partners, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, and SUHAKAM. I think it is very special that we celebrate this day together. We have come to the end of 2020, a year which began with much to celebrate, with the UN turning 75, with the Sustainable Development Goals reaching its 5th year of implementation, and with the launch of the Decade of Action by the UN Secretary General to accelerate the SDG achievements by 2030. However, the enthusiasm with which we welcomed this year has dissipated in the face of COVID-19. The pandemic has caused catastrophic loss of lives and devastated economies around the globe. Equally devastating is the impact it has been having on the development and lives of the most vulnerable parts of our societies. How we recover from this pandemic is therefore critical. And if we are to achieve our shared aspirations for a better world, a more sustainable planet where no one is left behind, human rights must be central to recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate the 72nd anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR. One of the most influential documents in the history of mankind, which embodies the core values of the United Nations and the work that we do. Please allow me to refer to the preamble of the Universal Declaration, which I think beautifully emphasizes that, I quote, "The recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, unquote. I believe there's much wisdom in this sentence, linking the upholding of dignity and equal rights to our enjoyment of freedom, justice, and peace. And the evidence since the Second World War has supported this connection. Indeed, the respect for human rights has served as a basis of peaceful and just societies. The Universal Declaration was the starting point for the great covenants and conventions which further detailed what equal and inalienable rights comprises of. And it also led to further elaborations on how human rights must be applied in the context of vulnerable groups, such as minorities, women, children, and people living with disabilities. Finally and importantly, this led to the shaping of our understanding that development and human rights are actually two sides of the same coin. And the culmination of this integration of development and human rights are the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs include human rights as their DNA. This is why the SDGs need to be linked to human rights to fully achieve Agenda 2030. Dear friends, although news of promising vaccines brings a lot of hope to overcome the health aspect of the COVID crisis, it will take a mammoth effort to rebuild livelihoods and economies and to bring the SDGs back on track. It will take unprecedented solidarity amongst nations and within countries if we are to build back better. But it is also true that opportunities for change usually arise out of crisis. The boldest innovations of humanity were born out of the ashes of adversity. Like other major crises, COVID presents us with a huge opportunity to change outdated, unfair, and inefficient policies. Human rights must be at the center of these policies, since this will ensure that people are always at the center of development. And consequently, post-COVID progress should be assessed on the basis of how countries treat its most vulnerable populations. That is the principle of leaving no one behind. How countries define checks and balances of the state vis-à-vis the individuals. This is why institutions such as the Independent Police Commission and safeguards such as the freedom of speech and the freedom of media are so important, as stipulated in SDG 16. And how countries ensure equal treatment for all groups of society, minorities and majorities alike, and foster inclusive societies. These are all essential aspects of this social contract between the state and the individual and of national identity. It is also very crucial to engage youth as a key agent of change during this unprecedented time. Youth are essential actors to shape the new normal for a more equitable, sustainable, and just world. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge Malaysia's commitment to human rights. The United Nations have been proud to work in your beautiful country since before independence. And we have been pleased to support Malaysia in various human rights efforts. In this regard, we commend the recent development of an effective system to monitor the implementation of Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, recommendations that is mapped to the SDGs. We also recognize the important role of SUHAKAM for the promotion and protection of human rights. We, as the UN in Malaysia, stand ready to support government and other partners now and in the future, and look forward to further strengthening our collaboration by signing the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework as soon as possible. On this 72nd International Human Rights Day, let us reinforce our commitment to work on the progressive realization of human rights. Let's recover better and stand up for human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pressner. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the pleasure to invite Datuk Sri Hishamuddin Tun Hussein, Minister of Foreign Affairs Malaysia, to deliver his official address and launch Human Rights Day 2020.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning to everyone joining today's virtual event. It is my honor and pleasure that Wisma Putra is part of this year's Human Rights Day commemoration alongside BHEUU, SUHAKAM, and the United Nations country team, a testament of our collaborative efforts in advancing the human rights agenda together. This year's theme, Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights, is apt as the world is slowly trying to recover from the impact of COVID-19. Focus has to be on striking the right balance between efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19 and upholding human rights. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the world is anxiously waiting for the development of a safe and effective vaccine to stem COVID-19. And some countries have also begun their national rollout plans or are taking part in phase 3 clinical trials. While these are positive developments, there is a high risk that global competition will increase the price of vaccines and other medical treatment, which will affect our efforts for global immunity. Let me be clear. Universal access to an affordable, accessible, and equitable vaccine is crucial. If anything, vaccination is a human right that must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. Therefore, international cooperation is extremely crucial at this juncture to ensure effective coordination and follow-up on efforts of the UN system to promote and ensure global access to medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment to face COVID-19. In this spirit, Malaysia has joined the COVAX Global Vaccine Facility and is collaborating with countries around the world to ensure that vaccines must be made a global public good. So, ladies and gentlemen, in addressing the current impact of the pandemic, the most vulnerable are always the hardest hit. COVID-19 has the power to destabilize and devastate the poorest in our communities. We can see economies contracting and livelihoods affected. Uniquely, our government has identified that the economic impacts of the pandemic has affected more women than men. To that end, the government implemented gender-responsive policies under the Prihatin and the Penjana stimulus packages, such as cash assistance for single mothers, childcare subsidies, and flexible work. We are also focused on addressing the rise in gender-based violence during the pandemic and took measures to safeguard and protect women by setting up helplines, online advocacy, shelters, and providing counseling services. The welfare of migrants, refugees, and stateless people in Malaysia were also not forgotten and have been given equal importance with free health screenings and medical treatments related to COVID-19, provided for all foreign nationals, regardless of their immigration status. Ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia remains committed to follow up on the recommendations we received during the 3rd Universal Periodic Review in November 2018. To this end, a multi-stakeholder biannual consultation involving all line agencies, academia, and civil society has been institutionalized. From these consultations, we also recognize the need to improve our monitoring mechanisms and have agreed to use the National Recommendations Tracking Database developed by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as it will facilitate monitoring and coordination among agencies in the implementation and delivery of our human rights commitment. It is worth mentioning that in 2020, Malaysia was selected by OHCHR as one of the 6 model countries for a study on good practices emerging from the UPR. Through the study, OHCHR will produce a public report on good practices emerging from the UPR, which would serve as a reference material for countries in future UPRs. It is therefore with great pleasure to announce that Malaysia is proud to present our candidature to the Human Rights Council for the year 2022 to 2024. The Human Rights Council embodies the spirit of multilateralism, which Malaysia continues to advocate, and as a member of the HRC, Malaysia will work closely with all actors to drive progress on human rights at home and also globally. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe there is an opportunity in every crisis, and COVID-19 gives us an opportunity to come together in solidarity as we address this crisis and lay the groundwork for a robust, sustained, and inclusive recovery, be it access to vaccines, healthcare, or economic recovery, and keeping human rights at the center of all our efforts. We are only as strong as our weakest link. We can only reach our common goal of building back and recovering better if we are able to create equal opportunities for all and address the failures exposed and exploited by COVID-19. To this end, international cooperation and multilateralism are even more crucial now than ever. And you can count on Malaysia as a partner as we navigate through this pandemic together. Today is an opportunity for all of us to reaffirm the importance of human rights in rebuilding the world we want, the need for global solidarity, as well as our interconnectedness and shared humanity. Happy Human Rights Day.
Thank you, Datuk Sri. As announced by Datuk Sri Hishamuddin, Malaysia is vying for a seat at the Human Rights Council for the term 2022 and 2024. We are proud to bring to all of you a video presentation on Malaysia's bid for the Human Rights Council.
Malaysia will continue to advocate, play an active international role, and enhance its collaboration and engagement with various stakeholders on issues related to human rights. Malaysia's human rights commitments are embedded in the 12th Malaysia Plan, National Human Rights Action Plan, and Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. Malaysia practices whole-of-government, whole-of-society approach in its UPR process. Human rights achievements in Malaysia include lowering of voting age from 21 to 18 years old, establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Plan for 2019-2023, establishment of the first special court for children in Southeast Asia in June 2017, and establishment of the 10 special select committees by the Malaysian Parliament, among others, Human Rights and Constitutional Affairs Committee, and Gender Equality and Family Development Committee. In supporting human rights, Malaysia has implemented and achieved the following initiatives: moratorium on capital punishments since 2018, 30% women in decision-making positions, recognized by the World Health Organization in 2018 as the first country in the Western Pacific region that has successfully eliminated mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis. Malaysia was a member of the Human Rights Council for the term 2006 to 2009 and 2010 to 2013. Malaysia was also a member of the Human Rights Council Consultative Group, coordinator of the Asia-Pacific Group, and Working Group on Situations, Malaysia has increased its voluntary contribution to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. The office also selected Malaysia as one of the model countries on UPR follow-up good practices. In supporting human rights globally, Malaysia has presented its SDG voluntary report in 2017 and has mapped out the SDG and human rights follow-up mechanisms. Malaysia is committed to support, collaborate, and share best practices through its Malaysia Technical Cooperation Program. The MTCP has benefited 34,415 recipients from 144 countries since 1980. Malaysia led the initiative on the Statement of Support to the United Nations Secretary-General's appeal for global ceasefire on 6 July 2020.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, next we also have a special video message from Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, United Nations Secretary General.
The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced two fundamental truths about human rights. First, human rights violations harm us all. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups, including frontline workers, people with disabilities, older people, women and girls, and minorities. It has thrived because poverty, inequality, discrimination, the destruction of our natural environment, and other human rights failures have created enormous fragilities in our societies. At the same time, the pandemic is undermining human rights by providing a pretext for heavy-handed security responses and repressive measures that curtail civic space and media freedom. The second truth highlighted by the pandemic is that human rights are universal and protect us all. An effective response to the pandemic must be based on solidarity and cooperation. Divisive approaches, authoritarianism, and nationalism make no sense against a global threat. People and their rights must be front and center of response and recovery. We need universal rights-based frameworks like health coverage for all to beat this pandemic and protect us for the future. My call to action for human rights spells out the central role of human rights in crisis response, gender equality, public participation, climate justice, and sustainable development. On Human Rights Day and every day, let's resolve to act collectively with human rights front and center to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and build a better future for all.
Up next, we have a video presentation titled Community Voices, the COVID-19 Effect. The next video is a compilation of personal testimonies by representatives of various communities from Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah, and Sarawak, recounting their experiences having been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and various movement restrictions imposed since March 2020.
Kesusahan banyak yang kita rintangi soalnya tentang kita mencari rezeki. Tidak dapat keluar karena hanya kita terkurung duduk dalam masa lockdown di rumah saja. Sekarang habis lockdown, kita berniaga dalam 2-3 bulan tak ada untung. Kita cuma hanya bayar sewa rumah habis duit sebab customer kita sudah tak ada. Seberapa ada rezeki itu sajalah boleh buat. Semasa lockdown, barang pengantaran makan itu adalah. Lagi nak minta dengan siapa? Macam inilah cara kita nak hidup untuk menambahkan rezeki. Yang penting kita halal.
Memang saya tak ada duit simpanan masa bulan 3 tu. Kadang pergi zakat Selangor minta bantuan kecemasannya. Saya bagilah dalam 200 aku dapat lah untuk beli beras barang keperluan dia. Cuma disebabkan SOP, minta maaf bukan saya nak melawan kerajaan, tidak. Bukan saya nak menidakkan. Saya cuma nak bergerak pergi cari makan dari satu tempat ke satu tempat dengan berbagai SOP. Saya terpaksa bawa isteri dan anak, kalau boleh bagi luar. Kerana dia SOP tu, kita patuh pada SOP COVID-19. kebebasan, tapi kita nak sikit kebebasan, kita bergerak supaya saya boleh mencari rezeki untuk bagi anak isteri kami.
Ada yang saya kategori OPU saya dapat berteman dengan JKM dengan saya makanan kat sini kan, ada masa kan tak boleh keluar kan, jadi kena tetap masa tu, jadi saya pun tak apa, saya pun OPU, jadi saya berjimat, kena berjimat lagi ya.
Proses belajar kita cuma hari-hari, masa hari Isnin sampai hari Khamis kita orang buat dalam Google Meet je lah. Bezaan dia kalau masa pergi sekolah kita ada jumpa cikgu nak tanya jawapan ke soalan yang kita tak tahu senang. Sekarang susah sebab kadang-kadang tanya cikgu, PM cikgu sendiri lah. Dah soalan ni sebab saya nak kena topat tiap bulan, nak internet, nak masuk Google Meet tu sebab internet nak masuk Google Meet tu kena pakai internet yang kuat jugalah. Kalau cikgu bagi, cikgu suruh print ke apa, kita kena pakai duit sendiri semua. Lepas tu nak buat kerja khusus tu semua kita orang kena pakai duit sendiri lah. Harap boleh lah cepatkan sebab susah kita macam ni nak pergi sekolah semua. Lagipun kita orang SPU nak kena extend lagi lama-lama.
Nama saya Sukina Gano, asal dari kampung Peranan Tempelore, tapi saya sekarang menetap di Pindang Maang. Pesan pandemik terhadap diri saya dan keluarga saya ini yang menyebabkan saya sukar untuk mencari pendapatan untuk kelangsungan itu sebenarnya adalah seorang pengasuh paskas sebelum ini. Tapi disebabkan pandemik ini tempat kerja kami ditutup dan saya kehilangan kerja lah. Dan bukan itu sahaja, saya juga menghadapi masalah ketika membantu anak saya dalam pembelajarannya disebabkan saya hanya mempunyai satu telepon pintar sahaja. Anak saya yang bersekolah rendah mempunyai 2 dan ini memberikan saya tekanan kerana dalam satu masa terdapat 2 kerja daripada kelas yang berbeza. Bagi cadangan saya untuk pihak kerajaan, saya harap pihak kerajaan adil dalam memantau mereka-mereka yang betul-betul memerlukan. Tidak semestinya macam laki dia kerja kerajaan masih boleh menampung kehidupan keluarga mereka. Mungkin keluarga ini mempunyai anak yang ramai, 7 orang, contoh macam saya lah. Walaupun suami bekerja belum tentu cukup untuk menampung perbelanjaan mereka lah. Semoga pandemik ini cepat berlalu dan kita boleh menjalani kehidupan seperti biasa.
Selama 10 tahun ngadan ke airi nungalingan bangsa ke cien lomu lepotau kerja ya keti selama ini di craft tangan dalam suek pulau uman lepake dalam bidang craft tangan ni lah. Sebelum COVID ni on 3 bisnes di craft tangan ni. Bokilu rajin di kerja adang on hasil ya. Ngan on pe dulu cok di tempat inu ya dulu kelok ti. Inu ya dulu kelok order kebaan tapung dengan bakun dengan ulang macam-macam lah dia tempahan dulu cukti. So nana COVID ni nudai terus sunyi beringan dulu beon kawat dulu lah cien bulan 4 dah ini natak tutup kedai me dalam bulan 4, bulan 5, bulan 6, bulan 7 baru menai start buka kedai. So ini pun sunyi tua di ondulun ne masat. Dulu takut dalam COVID-19 ni. So nai name buka nang bulan 7 ni ra ame nak tekak bisnes me nang ni kurang coale. Olah caliwai dalam seminggu kenai pelanggan ni beli tepalai na ulik kosong beon sukat ke bayan sewa na ngan tambang ni turun naik ni jaga kedai pa beon cukup membayar beli minyak So kumpin ni sik me ke pita udip na lao ini. Akik ngiyok benyatan buat ke pekini di sik covid ni sampai mau uman ni ngan kenala uman bayak pelau. Kumpin ni sik ben barang ni pelepa on kumpin ni sik ke pokok juan barang ni na lao mencik pu dipakai lah. Ben akik mencam kak bok kira kete ti kebun setakat uman sendiri tua. Kejuan pun berpilu suka juan mendulu. Pendulu petakut. Ilu kata juan mendulu. Men siok covid ni. Aki harap covid ni harap ya te salai lao lah. Apan sukat idai lah metok kerja ni nang uman madang lah. Oh, makasih.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with the second part of the program with 2 panel sessions lined up. The first panel discussion will focus on COVID-19 and human rights, and the second panel to cover the topic, Recover Better, Rebuild Together. The first session will be moderated by Datuk Mah Weng Kwai, Commissioner of SUHAKAM. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. Participants and viewers, should you have any questions, you may direct it and type it out in the chat feature on Zoom and also YouTube. And we will address them accordingly towards the end of the panel discussion. Without further ado, I will pass the floor to Datuk Mah Weng Kwai. The floor is yours, Datuk.
Thank you very much, MC Mr. Daniel, doing a wonderful job for us. May I wish everybody a very good morning and happy World Human Rights Day today. The Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Parliament and Law, Honorable Stefan Presna, Chairman of SUHAKAM, Tan Sri Osman Hashim, my fellow commissioners, learned speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. For this session, we have 3 speakers, each of whom will speak for about 10 minutes, followed by Q&A. Now, the objective of this panel discussion is to firstly recognize and to understand the dire negative impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Malaysia. How do we face these challenges together, working together with the different actors and stakeholders? How do we deal with human rights on one hand and recovery on the other? As the topic for today's, or rather the theme for today's celebration is stand up for human rights, I would go further and add it should not only be stand up for human rights, but to be stand up and be counted for human rights in Malaysia. We will also, of course, discuss on ways moving forward and the best practices and ways to rebuild together. We have mentioned 3 speakers. May I introduce our very first speaker, Dr. Hartini Zainuddin. She is a consultant for the Malaysian Red Crescent Society in Malaysia, a co-founder of Yayasan Chowkit, and vice president of Voice of the Children. Now, her topics mainly will be on challenges and issues and human rights violations faced by the vulnerable communities during the pandemic, civil society and NGO response to the pandemic, and recommendations to resolve these issues. And I think if time permitting, she will be talking about ATD, alternative detention of children. Dr. Hartini, please.
Yes, thank you, Datuk Ma. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to first thank the organizers for providing me with this opportunity to speak today. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Legal Department of the Prime Minister's Office, the UN Office of Malaysia, and SUHAKAM. Thank you so much for giving us this avenue. I represent many NGOs and CSOs working on child rights and working on child services here in Malaysia. And I must thank you again for giving us this opportunity to speak today and to talk about and discuss how to improve existing laws and regulations, as well as the structures and systems related to the protection of child rights in this country. When we talk about the impact of COVID-19 on children and youth, we are also obviously discussing the SDG goals, which focus on sustainable development, but they are inextricably linked to child rights. human rights and child rights specifically. Children are affected by all the SDGs, whether it's poverty, which is goal 1, or hunger, which is goal 2, health access, which is goal 3, education, goal 4, gender equality, goal 5, climate change, goal 13, or violence against children, which is goal 16.2. COVID-19 brought out the best in people, and it brought out the worst in people with certain policies that were placed, especially with the dissemination of information, distribution of food, access to health and education. Looking at marginalized children in urban and rural areas, both Malaysian and non-Malaysian, I need to point out what the gaps were. Many children, marginalized children in urban and rural settings, especially if they came from marginalized groups like refugees and stateless and migrant children, had no access to education, had no direct access to food in certain places, had no direct, easy access to health services, and many were detained. There was so much hate conversations going on in the country that it is imperative that we talk about combating xenophobia and the misinformation and disinformation that is exacerbating fear and sort of allowing or giving permission to certain rules and regulations that affect children. There is an impact also of mental health and trauma. So many times we, NGOs and CSOs or individuals, were receiving calls from children directly asking us what was going on. They were hungry, they were afraid, they wanted to know why people hated them because they were refugee children, why were people being driven from homes, were they going to die? These were questions no 6-year-old, no 7-year-old, no 13-year-old should have to face. And these were some of the impact that we saw during this time. The impact of COVID-19 on children and youth have also affected a lot of other sort of services as well. Nurseries, kindergartens, daycare centers, schools, universities were closed. The effect on education meant that there was exclusion, that access to education was not for all. And through online classes, most children in Malaysia were able to access education, but some were not. There was no access to internet, there was no access to educational tools or access to education. What was beautiful about this time was that even though the government could not provide access to all children, corporates, NGOs, CSOs, individuals were able to pull together sources, resources to sort of help these children. UN agencies, UNICEF, UNHCR, all were able to come in and pull everyone together to try to provide and fill that gap in terms of access to education. Malnourishment was another big issue. People went for food for days. Children didn't have food for 4 days. Children didn't have milk for 4 days. Mothers could not produce breast milk because mothers didn't eat for 4 days. Violence against children, we've spoken about this over the months, the rise in the number of cases of sexual abuse, the rise of children being beaten, the rise of online sexual abuse cases was something that is of great concern to all of us. The detention of children, the detention of refugees and migrants being chased out of their homes in the middle of the night, having to look for homes in the middle of the night was something that was of great concern that we had never seen before. And this was something that happened because of COVID-19, because of the fear, because of the xenophobia. Marginalized poor children, especially migrants, refugees, stateless, children in rural areas, children in urban areas, had a combination to these different issues and these different gaps in providing services and protection to the children. So I am going to bring in ATD because that is of great concern to all of us, because the number of children in detention at this current time is 746 children. 400 are unaccompanied minors, which means they are children with no parents, no families that are with them. 400 is a large number of children, and this is a spike. because we've never seen this many unaccompanied minors in detention centers for a long time. Governments, civil societies have to realize and uphold the rights of children, which have resulted in, yes, protection and access to education, etc., and healthcare. But again, we want to talk about ATD, or the alternative to detention, because children do not belong in detention centers. Hold on. I'm taking the next couple of, my next part of the presentation is actually slides that were taken from Super Society, but it talks very, very clearly and specifically about ATD. We have been advocating for the alternative to detention for children for almost 8 years, working and fighting to try to get five children out of detention for the last 8 years. So we want to push this ATD pilot project. The ATD pilot project allows the government to work collaboratively and in close coordination with civil society to pilot ways in which unaccompanied and separated children can be released from immigration detention centers into the care of civil society in Malaysia. Yayasan Chowkir, that's the organization that I co-founded, has offered to shelter the first 5 children that come out of detention centers. The goal of the pilot project is to develop a working alternative to detention model for children that can be effectively implemented longer term and integrated into national framework and structures. 400 children, 746 children should not be in detention. The pilot must be a project where not only those currently in detention are released, but more importantly, it is developed into an effective and sustainable program where children will never need to be placed in detention, as there are always alternatives in Malaysia. So what is an alternative to detention? The alternative to detention are any legislation, policy, or practice, formal or informal, that ensures that people are not detained for reasons related to the migrant status. It is not another form of detention. So that is part of it. I'm hoping that we do have time, Dr. Ma, to be able to speak more on ATD and the impact that COVID has on children. But for now, what I would like to do is to come up with a couple of suggestions, because we have this esteemed panel all listening to all of us and the different stakeholders in addressing this issue of child protection and child services. So please, if we can ask the different bodies to help us push this pilot project on ATD, and just look at providing basic, we're not even talking about more, basic rights to children and services. We need to set up task force. We need to set up task forces looking at international instruments like the Conventions of the Rights of the Child, which we signed, and the SDGs, and the conventions and policies through Malaysia's adoption of the Universal Periodic Review and our local laws like the Child Act to strengthen child protection and child rights. It is the framework to bring all the different agencies and ministries to agree that all children deserve to have a right to full protection and rights within our laws, even if basic. Please let us not leave any child behind. Please, let's look at low-hanging fruits, whether it's childhood statelessness and ATD, because we don't seem to make any difference between a child who is stateless, who is born and raised and most probably Malaysian, who have no documents, and a child who is migrant, or a child who is stateless, or a child who is a refugee. We need to be able to look at addressing these low-hanging fruits and to look at working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, maybe leading the charge, maybe talking to the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Prime Minister's Department, with the Legal Department, with the Attorney General, to look at ways in which we can bring together all the different relevant ministries with SUHAKAM, with the UN agencies, with the different stakeholders, to look and revise laws and that discriminate. We can talk about laws, but the truth of the matter is the policies are the one that come to trickle down to the ground. And the policies in many of these situations are not in line with the laws and instruments that we signed.
Thank you, Dato' Hartini. We are running out of time.
Sure.
You just wrap up, please.
Sure. So this is my final thread. There is this quote that's my favorite. that children are a message to the future we cannot see. So what is the message that we want to tell children and youth? What do we want to say to them? We want to tell them that all children matter, every single child. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hartini. Thank you for highlighting the many problems faced by children, especially during this COVID-19 period. And I think I can reassure you that work on ATD, alternative to detention of children, both accompanied and unaccompanied children, and the issue of statelessness. These are two issues which are currently being discussed and worked on by SUHAKAM together with other agencies. In fact, on ATD, when we last discussed with the ministers last year or year before, we were told that there would be halfway houses being set up for children to be transferred from detention centers to these halfway homes. But unfortunately, I don't think it has already taken off. Thank you. We will most certainly keep in touch, Dr.
Thank
Hatini.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us as second speaker, Dr. Loh Ying Ru. Dr. Loh is an infectious disease physician from Hamburg, Germany, and she's head of mission and WHO representative to Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore. This morning, Dr. Loh will be speaking to us on the role of the United Nations and WHO in responding to the pandemic. How can human rights principles support public health priorities in the context of COVID-19, and also access to vaccine, medicines, and treatment? And as mentioned by our chairman in his opening address, the right of access to health is obviously a fundamental human right, and the access to vaccines, now that they are being rolled out, I think that everyone should have a chance to be vaccinated. So can I now please invite Dr. Loh to talk to us, please? Dr. Loh, 10 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Dato. Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The right to health for all people is central to WHO's identity and mandate, and continues to be the overarching principle in all of our work, including the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. And in the face of this global COVID-19 emergency, it is more relevant than ever that everyone should have access to the health services they need, when and where they need them, without suffering financial hardship, discrimination, or health consequences. It has been almost a year since we began battling COVID-19 virus. WHO has worked hand in hand with not only the governments, but as part of the entire UN family, making early warnings and calls to action, urging member states to stop, contain, control, delay, and reduce the impact of the virus, issued evidence-based guidelines, and developed recommendations for the public on how to protect their health. We have been developing and supporting countries in implementing public health and social measures across the globe to limit transmission and reduce mortality and morbidity from COVID-19 until effective treatments and vaccines are available. The measures go far beyond public health and require each sector of society to participate in planning and compliance and bearing the economic and social impact. The UN family continues to move forward, working in synergy, because health is not just linked, but determined by other basic human rights, including access to safe drinking water and sanitation, nutritious food, gender equality, adequate housing, education, and safe working conditions. COVID-19 has tested our health system, our economies, our social and cultural norms, and our own personal beliefs and rights. All countries, including Malaysia, have faced many challenges in an effort to respond to what is now a long-term crisis, while striking a fine balance between protecting and promoting health and minimizing economic and social disruption. Ladies and gentlemen, this virus has brought major disparities to the surface, but has also brought us an important opportunity to address them. As we work to rebuild our societies and communities, we can ensure that those who were initially overlooked are better integrated into the response to successfully address public health concerns. Evidence shows that transmission among vulnerable groups should be addressed early on to prevent later surges, and we have learned this the hard way around the world, including in Malaysia. It is of the utmost importance to safeguard vulnerable and disadvantaged populations by implementing specific measures to support them, mobilizing resources, and engaging all relevant sectors and communities about their concerns and receive their feedback. Vulnerable communities and disadvantaged or disabled individuals may face immediate challenges in meeting their basic life needs, such as income, shelter, and food, when stringent public health and social measures are imposed. In specific settings, ladies and gentlemen, where it's difficult to safely and sufficiently implement or adhere to public health measures, such as worker dormitories, prisons, detention centers, factories, and more, health vulnerabilities and inequities are deepened and should be addressed. And as I said early on, prisons are overcrowded, and effective infection prevention control in overcrowded facility is nearly impossible. And once COVID-19 or another infectious disease is introduced to this environment, it spreads quickly, and we have seen that. It will be important moving forward to ensure access to proper hygiene and sanitation services for all people in prison, as well as detention center, as well as increasing awareness among prison management and detention center management and staff on effective infection prevention control for their own safety and the safety of others, the communities. Another consideration is expediting the early release of people whose offense falls within a certain category of crimes and ensuring effective diversion measures for alternatives to incarceration, through which we can reduce overcrowding and improve conditions while addressing health risks. Ladies and gentlemen, refugees and undocumented migrants, including their children, may fear legal consequences of seeking proper health care for COVID-19 and many, many other health issues, and impart additional burden to the health system when they present in critical stages because they did not access care in the first sign of illness. Ensuring that these populations will not be legally prosecuted if they come forward to seek health care would be a critical step in resolving this problem. This is why a rights-based approach to health requires that health policies and programs first prioritize the needs of those furthest behind and most vulnerable towards greater equity, a core principle in the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals and universal health coverage. This concept is essential at every stage of our collective response, especially as we draw nearer to a COVID-19 vaccine rollout. And this was mentioned earlier. Vaccines are a global public good, and there will be no true global recovery unless all parts of the world are able to bring transmission under control, while bearing in mind there are no shortcuts and no silver bullets. Our challenge reaches beyond development of a vaccine and into making them accessible to the public and distributing them equitably, and doing so together. The Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator is a global platform to fast-track the development, production, and fair and equitable access to COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. This platform has brought together leaders of governments, global health organizations, civil society groups, businesses, and philanthropies to support the fastest, most coordinated and successful global effort in history to develop tools to fight a disease and plan for mid and long-term recovery. Within the ACT Accelerator, the COVID-19 vaccine allocation plan, or we call it also COVAX, focuses on the development and manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines and aims to guarantee fair, I repeat, fair and equitable access for everyone with the world's largest and most diverse portfolio of multiple vaccine candidates. WHO, UNICEF, and other partners are supporting countries in identifying and prioritizing their most vulnerable groups in an effort to ensure that those who are most at risk have access to the vaccine first. If we overlook the most vulnerable, but by not ensuring their needs are considered and integrated into the response, we could jeopardize national and global efforts to stop transmission and end the pandemic. We must also continue beyond the response to ensure that human rights are a key part of our recovery and future. Ladies and gentlemen, we called this year for global solidarity, and we have seen what is possible if we all work together for a common goal and a common good. The pandemic has disrupted our lives in many ways, but in this moment, we can promote a vision of a world better organized to protect health, human rights, and dignity. We should not just recover, but recover better to a world where the decisions that affect people are directly reflective of their needs, and everyone can access healthcare services without stigma and discrimination of any kind. I would like to conclude with acknowledging the commitment of the Malaysian government to human rights, accessing the Human Rights Council, and I would like, with full heart, congratulate SUHAKAM for its long-standing, good, and very, very important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loh. On behalf of SUHAKAM, may I say thank you to the United Nations generally for the good work done in response to the epidemic, and specifically to WHO for all the hard work you have done since the outbreak early this year, regardless of the negative response from the United States. We have heard quite a bit on sorry, the interruption on the sound. Okay, sorry. We have heard you mentioned of the various steps taken to help vulnerable groups. You have mentioned undocumented migrants and workers. And I think the last part of your talk was very optimistic in that I find there is good reason to believe that with the access to vaccines, and we will be in a position to recover better and to rebuild what we have lost this year a little more positively. Thank you very much, Dr. Loh. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have our third speaker, Dr. Aisha binti Ayub. She's not with us live, but it's a recorded message from her. Dr. Aisha is an epidemiologist. I hope I got that right. And she's actively involved in the policy-making process for the national control measures and the permanent rep from the Ministry of Health at the meetings held by the National Security Council to combat COVID-19 in Malaysia. Dr. Aisha is a Deputy Director of Disease Control Division, Surveillance in the Ministry of Health. She will be talking to us on challenges faced by the government. How did the public health system, the MOH and other respondents reach out to include vulnerable groups? And importantly, what is the way forward? How do we face 2021 with the, what are the challenges and the opportunities that are open to us to rebuild our lives? Dr. Aisha, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Aisha binti Ayub, and I'm delivering this speech on behalf of Dr. Chong Chi Kiong, the Deputy Director General of Health, Public Health of Ministry of Health Malaysia. And firstly, I wish to express my sincere appreciation to the Bahagian Hal Ehwal Undang-Undang or BHEUU for having been so kind to accommodate our humble request of being able to share our input via this pre-recorded video. I wish to thank the organizers for having set up this forum in conjunction with the International Human Rights Day. We really would have loved to join this forum and meet all of you face to face if we are not dealing with this pandemic. Sadly, we are now actively combating the third wave of pandemic within our community, and we are not able to join all of you for the virtual panel due to several clashing video conferences happening concurrently. Nevertheless, it is my utmost pleasure to share some of our views, thoughts, and input from the Ministry of Health Malaysia. Indeed, we are so thankful that we have been allocated a few minutes, as this is a great platform for us to share with you all that the MOH has been doing through this pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the MOH has been involved in daily meeting with the National Security Council, and from the beginning of this pandemic, we have been in a series of discussion that comprises of health screening, preventive measures, and other national control measures for the COVID-19. This pandemic has truly revealed the strength and resilience of a nation's healthcare system. The MOH Malaysia is so glad to have had our public health preparedness enhanced and strengthened, as proven by the Joint External Evaluation or JEE conducted by WHO recently. We have seen that truly in a community, until and unless every single person is taken care of and protected from COVID-19, nobody is safe. This pandemic has been a reminder to us, all of us, that every life matters. This is the embodiment of the spirit of universal health coverage and leaving no one behind. The Ministry of Health have been actively leading the efforts and control measures taken at the national level, together with other ministries. This effort taken include implementation of the Administrative Targeted Enhanced Movement Control Order or TEMCO in specific areas, tracing the close contacts of confirmed COVID-19 cases, implementation of the disinfection and decontamination in location related to COVID-19 cases, also implementation of screening at domestic and international points of entry, the expansion of screening for high-risk communities and groups in the community, mobilization of health support teams to the red zones, increasing the number of beds in hospital and quarantine centers to accommodate these cases, and also, lastly, increasing the capacity of medical laboratories, to name a few. In this COVID-19 pandemic, close contacts to anyone diagnosed as positive with COVID-19 will be screened free of charge. As you are well aware, once a person has been diagnosed as positive for COVID-19 upon a swab test, the person will be admitted to one of our general hospitals that treat COVID-19. The person will be then given free treatment at the general hospital regardless of the citizenship. And I'm also pleased to share with all of you that treatment for communicable diseases, namely yellow fever, Ebola, cholera, malaria, plague, typhoid, tuberculosis, that is the first line of drugs treatment, leprosy, COVID-19 and influenza are also free to everyone regardless of citizenship. So in controlling the spread of COVID-19, undocumented migrants have been screened for COVID-19 prior to being admitted to the immigration detention centers. This would potentially prevent the spread within the inmates at these centers from the new detainees. In addition to that, strategic communication has been a vital tool for us to communicate with the public on the latest information as presented daily by our Director General, Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Hisham bin Abdullah during the daily press conference. We have also been closely working with our WHO colleagues, and I wish to particularly thank Dr. Loh Yingru, the WHO country representative for Malaysia, Brunei, Darussalam, and Singapore, for having worked so closely with the MOH throughout this pandemic. We have received so much support, PPEs, test kits, and technical expertise from WHO to help us all over the country. WHO has also been instrumental in preparing information for the public in various languages so that more people can be targeted. One of our biggest challenges during this pandemic has been in dealing with fake news. Much time has been spent verifying and correcting the public's perception based on fake news received due to the act of several irresponsible groups of people. We want to take this opportunity to remind all of you to always check before you forward messages that you receive on social media. In conclusion, we are all together. We are not here to find faults or blame anybody. We value the tremendous efforts that has been put by SUHAKAM and various NGOs in championing for the rights of the vulnerable population within the community. We want to emphasize that the Ministry of Health Malaysia cares for every single one without any form of discrimination, prejudice, or stigma. And we are also sincerely doing our best from the ground level right to the top management. We regret to inform you that we are unable to send any representative to the Q&A session for this forum too. Nevertheless, please feel free to write in to us for your questions, and we will be more than happy to help. We wish to take this opportunity to remind all of you to please avoid free seats, namely crowded places, confined spaces, and conversation at close proximity. Please remember to practice the 3 W's, that is, wash your hands frequently with water and soap, wear your mask, and please avoid shaking hands or touching others. Please practice good coughing and sneezing etiquette and disinfect frequently touches surfaces. And most importantly, to stay at home and only go out for important matters. If you experience any symptoms, please seek treatment at the nearest healthcare facilities. In unity and solidarity, we will win this battle together. Let us continue to work together, and please do stay safe. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azia. Thank you for those timely reminders. It's so easy to forget. Allow me to also, on behalf of SUHAKAM, thank yourself, the Director General of MOH and MOH, for the good work all of you have been doing in combating COVID-19. I think you have taken the bull by the horns. You have done all the necessary, measures, and I think the results are there for us to see. I'm duly encouraged, Dr. Azia, when you mentioned that every life matters, because that's a very basis of human rights, because it's a fundamental human right to life. And also the fact that you have mentioned that there's no discrimination in the treatment of all persons in health-wise in this country. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have finished the portion of speeches by the 3 speakers. We now go into Q&A session, and we have about 30 minutes for this session. Am I right? According to the program, it's 30 minutes. I'm not sure how much time we actually will have. Can we have questions from participants, please? Please identify yourself and tell us what you want and whom you want to address the question to. Unfortunately, it will have to be between Dr. Hartini and Dr. Loh to answer your questions. Anyone out there? Can we have Daniel, MC, can you please read out the questions, those that have already been posted on the screen?
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions in the chat box here, but I do believe that Dr. Hartini has already some of the questions. But let me just read out the first question, Doctor, from Kaula Fadzil. Hi, Dr. Tini. Thailand and Indonesia has moved towards ATD. Is this feasible for Malaysia, and where are we on this? What is needed now? Dr. Hartini?
Oh, I think I answered already. So basically, where we've heard that the Ministry of Women, together with the Ministry of Home Affairs, are going to table a cabinet paper on ATD to move the pilot project allowing the 5 children to be part of this thing, and they will be sheltered with us in that safe house that you were mentioning, Datuk Ma. So we're waiting to hear when that will be tabled, and we're sort of praying and championing that it happens very, very soon. So yeah, but like you said, we've been waiting 8 years, so let's see.
We also have another question from Hafiz. With regard to the impact of COVID-19 to children, there's a report saying we're facing a rise of child labor globally due to COVID-19. His question is, in your opinion, does the current measure in combating child labor is enough, or all relevant parties need to figure out new measures to address this issue? So, Dr. Hartini?
I think I answered that one too. More details. Yeah. Okay, so yes, of course, we've seen a rise in child labor, and we need to do more in combating child labor. Child labor, forced child labor especially, is a form of trafficking. Trafficking for commercial purposes. So we do need to look at it. We know that many families have lost their jobs. We know that we have to combat this disconnect between children helping their families and children being in school. So we need to sort of engage with the different relevant stakeholders in terms of ensuring that children stay in school and still help their parents and not be forced to get involved in child labor. But we definitely, I don't think, have done enough. We need to look at, I think, alternative livelihoods and different ways of supporting parents so children get to stay and be children. So yeah, we need to do more.
Thank you, Dr. Hartini. Adding to that conversation, if I may, it's absolutely correct to say that child labor is a form of trafficking, child trafficking. I think the laws are there, especially in Malaysia, we have the laws. It's always a question of the will to enforce the laws. And when there are wrongdoers identified and brought to court, I think the weight of the law should be brought down on these people to bear. So that's something that is always an ongoing situation. But may I add that we do have an Office of Children Commissioner established in within SUHAKAM very recently. I mean, it's for about a year now. And in fact, I have with me Dato Professor Asias next to me. She will be moderating the next session. And she is our Commissioner for Children's Affairs. So this is definitely one issue, child trafficking and child labor, that is very much within her purview. Yeah. Any other questions? We have any questions for Dr. Loh? Daniel?
Okay, we do have a question for Dr. Loh. This question is from Andrew Koo. The Malaysian government has indicated that there are several thousand persons in our prisons that could be released early in line with COVID-19 mitigation measures. But so far, it does not appear that many have actually been released. Does the WHO have any recommendations and suggestions as to how governments can be encouraged to expedite the process? There is no point having a policy and a process, but no practical realization of the same. Dr. Loh?
Well, thank you very much for this question. It's very heartening and very encouraging to hear that there are plans for an early release. So I could just not do more than advocating for it. And in particular, because if we look at the numbers, that 70,000 prison inmates are currently incarcerated. That's an increase to 2 years ago, about 64,000. But we have only 50,000 prison places, actually. So that would greatly help. And the UN, United Nations, in particular, United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, they're standing ready, and they have sent a letter actually to the government of Malaysia to support these efforts and to address them in detail. So we very welcome these plans.
Thank you, Dr. Loh. While on this point about access to health and the availability of vaccines, I was just listening to CNN last night, and it was reported that almost 67 countries in the world will not be able to afford vaccines for its population. And surprisingly, this list included Pakistan. So since it's a global effort, it's just not something that Malaysia can do or Singapore can do, but it's a global effort to fight this pandemic, simply because there will be people traveling from one country to the other. It's no good having 100% safety in your own country, and then you have foreigners coming in and the problem starts again. So what kind of role or what kind of assistance will WHO or UN generally be giving to these 67 poorer countries?
Thank you much. Thank you very much for this question, Dato. It's very important. I've mentioned that the WHO and the international community, they have established the COVAX, and that includes access to COVAX vaccine platforms, and it includes the COVAX facility. So this COVAX facility is a mechanism to share risks, so to accelerate for the accelerated research and development of COVID-19 vaccines, the manufacturing, and the fair and equitable distribution. So the details of that means that there are self-financing countries and lower middle income countries which can make an advanced market agreement. So far in this COVAX facility, there are 189 countries which have subscribed to this, and that includes Malaysia. And the COVAX facility ensures that with this financing plus donations from development banks like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and philanthropies, the lower income countries who make an advanced market commitment can access vaccines for 20% of their population in each and every country. So this portfolio includes now 18 vaccines, which are where the developers, the manufacturers have requested to be included, but we are waiting for the data and the results of these vaccines. So WHO has now started to review vaccines. The Pfizer vaccine is not part of the portfolio, but other vaccines like AstraZeneca's vaccine, for example, is part of this portfolio. So 20% of all countries, at least to protect their healthcare workers, number one, frontline workers, this is about 1% of the population, then elderly, 65 years and above, and then those with underlying disease conditions. And that's for every country, so that not one country is being left out. I hope that answers your question.
Wonderful, really good to know. But while on this point about the COVAX agreement, I see a question here which asks, the COVAX agreement covers procurement. Does it also provide transportation and distribution? Malaysia has a large rural population, and how can we ensure this, they get equitable access? This question is from Imran Arif.
Well, it includes the transportation to the point of entry, and from there it would be the responsibility of each of the governments to ensure the distribution. So we have seen, we have heard from the government that they have procured the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. So that comes with a freezer and frozen packs. And we know, for example, from the programs we supported in Sabah on the polio vaccination, the how do you call it, the oral polio vaccine, which was donated from the WHO stockpile for the children in Sabah. And children were vaccinated irrespective of citizenship, but all children below 13 years in a big effort of the state health government and the Ministry of Health Malaysia. So, and we know, and these vaccines have to be stored at -80 degrees. If not, they change their color and they're not anymore usable. So we know that in Malaysia, there would be a possibility, they have the capacity to deliver the vaccine to the storage facility and administer it at a number of hospitals. But there is a lot of work to do, and actually the government and us, WHO and UNICEF and others, we are really working around the clock to work out the logistics, including the planning with Malaysia, Brunei, Darussalam, and other countries.
Right, which means to say, Doctor, that if the vaccine is not properly stored at below, sorry, how many degrees centigrade? Minus 18, is it? 80. Okay, and
or 70 actually, but with this, the freezers are -80.
Okay, and it has to be used within 5 days. Am I correct to understand that? There's a time limit on the use of this vaccine.
Well, outside of that storage temperature.
Wow, so the transportation, the distribution, and the actual use of the vaccine is really very, very important, time-wise.
But yeah, we have established systems for transporting vaccines. And unfortunately, with the polio outbreak in Sabah, we were able to bring in vaccines from the global stockpile through UNICEF at -80 degree. And they were delivered. We received them at the MOH designated warehouse, and they were distributed to Sabah. So we know it works. Malaysia can do it.
Wow, good to know. Very encouraging.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's encouraging, yes.
Right.
But I'm not saying that there will be some errors, but you know, it's also a lot of money for the government of Malaysia. And what the experience we have is that the doctors, nurses, the logistics, people it's very capable, including in this case in Sabah. And people go way beyond their physical capacity here to help and to do things. And I hope this will be the last thing or for a time to do, because people, the healthcare workers, the doctors, they are tired, they are exhausted.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think our thanks, our unreserved thanks go out to the frontliners, all the staff, medical staff and the hospitals for doing a wonderful job, and a very dangerous job, I must add. Okay, thank you, Dr. Loh. We have a question for Dr. Hartini, and question is, you mentioned about a pilot project for children in detention, and the 5 children to be put under the care of Yayasan Chowkit. The question is, when was this proposed to the government, and what was their response? Dr. Hartini, please.
Okay, so this isn't something that Yayasan Chowkit is taking on alone. We're actually working with Super Society that's going to be doing the case management on the children that come out for the pilot project and the next group, etc. So the ATD program was proposed 8 years ago. We were supposed to move on it last year, and the cabinet paper actually was supposed to have been tabled at the end of last year, beginning of this year, but then we changed government, so it got delayed. So now the question is, we're asking as well, when is the cabinet paper going to be tabled? We've heard that it will be tabled soon, so we just want to know when soon is soon. So yeah, so we've waited 8 years.
Thank you, Dr. Hartini. I think in our annual report 2019, there was also mention of ATD and you have read our report, and there's mention of that. And if our report had been debated or will be debated soon, then this will be discussed in Parliament. We are still hoping that our annual report will get debated. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have one further question, and I think either Dr. Hartini or Dr. Loh can answer this. It's a general question. Do you think there's any limitation in ensuring the rights of freedom of education in Malaysia? Would you like to answer this question? It's about freedom of education.
Could you specify what you mean that freedom of education, that everyone gets education in government facilities? Is that the question?
I'm not sure, Dr. Loh, because the question is very brief, but I think this will encapsulate positions where it's about education to Malaysian children. And the problem, of course, is with children in detention, in the refugee camps. They have little or no access to education. And undocumented migrants and their children and so on. So yeah, it's more of, I know it's not the question of health, but more of education. Maybe Dr. Hartini, you can give us a response.
So we know through working and talking to UNICEF and the different organizations that there are children marginalized even more because they have no access to education, especially during the COVID-19. But I think that we can take an opportunity out of this and create and sort of strengthen the alternative ways in which, the ingenuous ways in which the NGOs and the different organizations and groups have sort of scrambled to try to provide access to education for children. I think in many ways, and I'm trained as a teacher, even although I don't teach, the alternative access to education ways would provide different opportunities for children to pursue and have access to quality education as well, not just the government schools. But I think, you know, if we're talking about children in prison, children in remand, children in detention, children in rural areas, children who have no access to the instruments to get access to the internet, etc. It's been very, very hard. So we're going to have to scramble a lot to provide these alternative access to education for them. And they're going to have to do a lot of catch-ups. But, you know, I have faith there because these children are resilient, are the most resilient group of children ever. So we're gonna see what we can do next year and try harder. But I think for this panel and this audience, it would be great if we collaborate, work together, find ways of providing access to children. And of course, if the government were to lift that reservation on the UNCRC on Article 28C, that would be amazing. So all children would have access to education. That would be the best. But in the meantime, we do what we can.
Thank you, Dr. Hartini. I have a question here from Andrew Koo. Andrew, of course, is a prominent human rights defender and activist and a member of the Bar Council. It's addressed to you, Dr. Loh. Malaysia has secured 12.8 million doses of the Pfizer biotech vaccine, covering 20% of our population. And it's reported that Malaysia will have vaccine doses for 10% of the population from COVAX. Do you have any idea what will happen to the remaining 70% of the population? Dr. Loh?
Thank you, Andrew, for the question. So I think that's a very important question. It depends on the vaccination strategy around the world, which will be taken at the moment, in particular in Europe, Northern America, where they're very, very hard hit. It's really an attempt of the last resort because all the other public health and social measures were not as effective as they should have been. And, the numbers are much, much higher than what we see in other countries, including as Malaysia. So the strategy there is to vaccinate 60–70% of the population to regain herd immunity. And that, but the first 1 year will be really to focus. That's a major undertaking. In the first 1 year, we'll do to prioritize these first 20% or 10% and then 20% of the population which are at highest risk. I think with there's so many vaccines in the development pipeline. They are now in human in research, and there are many more vaccines which will come out, and we'll have to see which vaccines are becoming available and at what price when the data are released. For sure, in the first year, I think the focus will be on high-risk populations to protect essential services like healthcare workers, frontliners, and those who are very likely to die. And it may happen that vaccination strategies also change over time. So we have to, next year will be very critical to see how the epidemic evolves, how the vaccination programs are rolled out in countries which are now starting, and how the epidemic evolves.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. One last question before we wind up. Time has actually caught up with us, but I must ask this question. It's from Dr. Nick Salida, one of our commissioners here. She won't forgive me if I do not ask this question to Dr. Hartini. Dr. Hartini, what are the gaps and challenges faced by parents or caregivers on the issue of birth registration of babies, especially those who are affected by migration? Dr. Hartini?
Okay, so what are the challenges in registering children? Was that the question? Sorry.
Yes, yes.
There are so many. There are so many challenges because we go into stigma, we go into the fact that we have so many unwed mothers having children born out of wedlock, and therefore, you know, have real challenge in trying to register the child because of the God, I can't think of the word, but basically there is a punitive consequence to this. If you are Muslim and you have a child born out of wedlock, there is discrimination, and there is also a real fear of being punished by the religious department, and you know, or being called out, especially if you do not tell your parents and you're underage, in terms of registering your child. So we have that connected to baby dumping, and also children being born out of wedlock. We also have refugees, stateless, migrant parents who are afraid of going to register their children at the Jabatan Pendaftaran Negara, etc., because they're afraid of being detained, you know, which is the same problem we have, which is why they don't go to the hospitals. There are so many challenges. There is a 50 ringgit fine for every year that you don't register your child. For every year that you don't register your child, it's a 50 ringgit fine. JKM, Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat, Jabatan Pendaftaran Negara, can waive that fine if JKM agrees. But many times, I know a mother who had 6 children and all 6 children weren't registered. She owed thousands of dollars. And you know, to educate the mother to say, you know what, we'll try to apply for that waiver, is something that's very difficult and challenging as well. So that's something. Never mind mothers in rural areas in Sarawak, Sabah, etc., or you know, orang asal, orang asli children who need to, you know, to try to catch the mobile birth registration vans or to go to the offices. It's so difficult for them. So we need to think of ways in which we can sort of waiver that fine for not registering a child, to being able to come up with more alternative ways of being able to do birth registration. The whole reason why we have stateless children is partly because of that, because you know, offices and policies don't allow this, and we have to find ways to be able to do it, and to know the difference between the fact that birth registration doesn't equal to citizenship. That you can register a child for birth because that is your first line of protection and defense in knowing who your identity is, which is the reason why we should lift our second reservation on the UNCRC on right to identity. But you know, so we need to know that birth registration is a universal right of every child to get a birth certificate, and that no child should go without. And if the mother doesn't do that, that we should still allow the mother to register the child later, and that fine should disappear. But there's so many things, and we should have a whole conversation on this as well. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartini, for that detailed answer. Yes, obviously there's a big difference between birth registration and citizenship. And even as I speak, this is a project that SUHAKAM will be undertaking on the state of statelessness in this country, not just in Semenanjung, but Sabah, especially Sabah and Sarawak as well. We are going to start off with research done by researchers to get baseline data and so on. And perhaps once we get all this information, we may have an inquiry held into this. It's a very big problem, but it is a problem that needs to be looked at and addressed. So I think I really must wrap up. I'm so sorry if we have gone way beyond time. I must really thank you, Dr. Hartini and Dr. Loh, for your time and your very, very frank and sincere answers to the questions that have been raised. Thank you to IMC, Daniel. It's been all nice talking to all of you this morning. It's been a very fruitful morning. That's for me. We have a second session. I'll pass it on now back to MC, and then you can take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very insightful exchange on COVID-19 and human rights. Thank you, Dr. Moderator, doctors. Next, we will proceed with the second panel to discuss the topic, Recover Better, Rebuild Together. The session will be moderated by Professor Dato Dr. Nur Aziah binti Muhammad Awal, Children's Commissioner at SUHAKAM. I have the pleasure of inviting Commissioner Professor Dato Dr. Nur Aziah to take the floor and moderate the session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel. A very good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bagi Tan Sri, Chairman of SUHAKAM, and various distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This second session is equally important because it's going to talk about recover better and rebuild together. And of course, we have heard Dato' Hartini's talking about the difficulties and the various issues relating to children during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, I think children during the pandemic, they are vulnerable groups, women, children, the elderly, special needs, refugees and migrants that are affected by the pandemic and also by the things that we are doing in Malaysia. But of course, in Malaysia, we have like 9.3 million children. And out of that, we also have youth are 15 to 30 age 30, and then this group actually are affected by COVID-19. Now, when you talk about youth and also children, of course, with the Convention on Rights of the Children, and of course now SUHAKAM have the Office of the Children Commissioner, various issues on children have come into surface. In fact, it has been there for a very long time, and it has always been being worked out by the Ministry of Women, various NGOs, and so on and so forth. So, and of course, with CRC, we have basics, the 4 basic rights, as we all know, in terms of non-discriminations, best interests of children, children's right to life and survival, and also children's rights to participation. So today, during this session, we are going to have 4 panels, and that will be talking about how to recover better and rebuild together in relation to the issue of COVID-19, and also in human rights issues relating to youth and children. Our first panelist, I'm not going to delay this because I know time is against us. Our first panelist is Mr. Koloni Gunting, the Deputy Undersecretary of the Community Development, Senior Citizen and Disabled, Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. Mr. Koloni has been in the ministry for quite some time, and in the government service. He has been with the Mampu in the Transformation Policy Division. He was also the Director of Planning, Innovation and Coordination Division of Public Complaint Bureau of the Prime Minister Department. He has also been with the Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water, and also Ministry of Wellbeing, Housing and Local Government. Of course, now as Deputy Secretary of the Community Development, I think he has all that experiences to talk about the various issues that we are going to discuss today. And in fact, Mr. Kaloni was going to talk about challenges faced by government, a government response to alleviating the negative impacts of the pandemic and the movement control restriction, and reducing vulnerabilities and protecting the rights of vulnerable communities, and also responding to gender-based violence during the pandemic. So without further ado, I welcome Mr. Kaloni to speak on those issues. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Before this, if we are talking about Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development, here actually for our clients here, Minister said all citizens of Malaysia is our client. For example, women is also our clients, and then children, and then we're talking about disabled, senior citizens, and also refugee under UNHCR, also our customer of our clients here. Okay, in this case, for example, like when we're talking about pandemic COVID-19, the challenges that we are facing here, especially related to children's, in terms of what we call that care center for children, which under this pandemic COVID-19, most of the care center has to close down. And then this difficult for their parents to send their children to the care center. And then most of the what you call that parents have to work from home. And then the other things, when we are working from home, we are talking about infrastructure. Infrastructure, for example, like there's some platforms of communications cannot be used. For example, like in our governments, like Zoom applications, in terms of cybersecurity, is not secure for government to use it. Therefore, we have to change to Skype, for example, Skype for Business. And then the problem with Skype for Business is the stability of the cable, or stability of the line itself is not that it's not that stable for our communicate from home. So I think if a meeting had to be done from home, like in our case now, we are using Zoom. I suppose. So I think Zoom is quite stable, but it is not secure for in terms of cyber security. And then the other things, when we're talking about challenges here is economic. The problem with economic, and then these things for those who are in poverty, they are having a problem here. They don't have income. For example, the some have to be retrenched or so this affect their children also. Okay. And then another issue that we are facing here in terms of coordination and integration between the government itself. For example, like the closing down of healthcare or care center for children, this kind of things, The problem is there are some, based on the 3-tier government that we have, There's some, for example, like those who are in state government, they govern themselves. Each state, they have their own procedure. You know, this will make things, that's why we are not coordinated in terms of policy wise. For example, from one government to one state government to another state government. Let's say Sarawak governments and Kedah government, maybe they have a difference. That's why in terms of pandemic itself, COVID-19 or restriction movement itself, from one state to another state, they have a different length of what you call that movement. So this kind of thing also affect most of our vulnerable community here. Okay, I think this is the challenge that we are facing now. Okay.
And also, when you talk about what about the gender-based violence during pandemic, do you have any data on that, and what are the challenges that you faced?
Okay. Violence domestic, also that's also going to affect most of the women, either women or maybe some men, we do not know. But in our case, we are cater for women. So in this case, in terms of violence, so far, okay, what we do for, if there's any violent case, we have what we call is a support center for those who are affected by violence, for example, for domestic violence. In this case of pandemic, we use, for example, like MOS, and so there's for in Kedah itself, we use pondok, you know, we call it pondok here, whereby these people who have problems and for them to get temporary protections, they can go to the pondok or they can go to the mosque. At the same time, they also can go to the what you call that our what you call that support center. We have our support center. We have this we call Anjong Singgah. You know, these people, those are women who are affected by violence, they can go to this center. At the moment, we don't have any what you call that data on how many those who have been affected by this domestic violence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karanim. I think I will move to the second speakers, but Ms. Shivani, just to point out that the Office of the Children Commissioner has actually done a couple of dialogues during COVID-19, and what we have also found that from the Ministry of Women, Family, Community Development, is in particular the Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat, the Welfare Department. We were informed that, of course, under the Domestic Violence Act, when we amended it, we actually provide the emergency protection order under that act, and that could be granted by welfare officer. The JKM officer could actually grant the EPO. And according to the officer in charge during our dialogue, in 2019, JKM actually only granted one EPO, but during COVID-19, there were 15 EPO that was granted during those sessions. So I think I will move on to a second speaker. Our second speaker is Ms. Shivani Verma, who is a human rights officer at OHCR Southeast Asia Regional Office. Ms. Shivani works as a human rights officer with the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights Regional Office in South Asia in Bangkok since 2016. She has been with UN Office since 2006, having worked in the office in Nepal, Somalia, Iraq, and in Gaza as well, and the occupied Palestinian territory. Shivani had worked as an investigator in two special investigations initiated by United Nations into the alleged violations of international human rights law and humanitarian law. in a fact-finding missions in the Gaza conflict in 2009-2010, and OHCHR special investigation on Sri Lanka in 2015-2016. And prior to joining OHCHR, Ms. Verma worked on human rights issues in the context of armed conflict, penal reform, and gender violence. Please welcome Ms. Shivani.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Just checking the volume.
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and all participants. On behalf of the UN Human Rights Office, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, I would like to thank you all for inviting the office to join this virtual forum to mark International Human Rights Day. This year's Human Rights Day falls at a time we will never forget. COVID-19 has taken us by storm and shaken our world. Most of us would agree that before COVID-19, the picture was not entirely rosy. Despite strong economic growth and unprecedented poverty reduction, the Asia-Pacific region has been characterized by high levels of inequality, low levels of social protection, large informal sector, millions of people on the move in precarious situations who are unable to access resources, healthcare, and social protection. Added to this are worrying levels of climate change, including ecosystem damage, biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, and air quality. We knew this, but COVID-19 has put a spotlight on this, revealing fractures and weaknesses in the fragile skeleton of the societies we have built. This Human Rights Day is a call for action, a call for us to seize this extraordinary opportunity and build a world we want as envisioned in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, whose 72nd anniversary we celebrate today. But for that, we must accept the lessons from this crisis. So what are these lessons? First lesson of COVID-19 is its demonstration of the profound value of a human rights-based approach rooted in the principle of non-discrimination. Like pre-existing conditions that make individuals more fragile, gaps in respecting human rights have made all of society more vulnerable. In the prolific words of Martin Luther King, whatever affects one directly affects all. In Asia, as in the case elsewhere, migrants and refugees, especially when they are in undocumented or otherwise precarious situations, have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, unable to protect themselves from the virus because they're forced to live and work in overcrowded, unhygienic conditions, and denied equal access to public health and responses and critical social safety nets. The region has also witnessed alarming spikes in hate speech amid growing intolerance and xenophobia against migrants who have been stigmatized as disease carriers and unfairly blamed for spreading the virus. Human rights defenders have been threatened for supporting migrants, and journalists have been hindered in reporting about human rights concerns related to migrants. Such threats and hateful comments have also been made by individuals affiliated with governments, political parties, and public officials. Manifestations of discrimination against women and girls, widespread already before COVID-19, has been exacerbated in most areas of life, from the heightened risk of gender-based violence and unmet needs for sexual reproductive health and the rights to loss of jobs, livelihoods, access to education, and the increased burden of unpaid care work. COVID-19 has also had a disproportionate impact on LGBT and gender diverse persons and communities. That, with few exceptions, stay-at-home directives, isolation, increased stress, and exposure to disrespectful family members, restrictions on movement, have exacerbated the risk of violence, physical and psychological, with a particular impact on older persons and youths. Devastating economic effects, including unemployment, are affecting economic and social rights and exacerbating vulnerabilities. Distinguished guests, speakers, and participants, in the midst of this very complex, dangerous, and fast-moving crisis, there have also been some positive examples, steps that have been taken guided by human rights principles to ensure that vulnerable populations are included as part of the comprehensive response to COVID-19. National human rights institutions have played a critical role in responding to these extraordinary circumstances. Action has been taken to safeguard older people and others in long-term care institutions, to provide immediate effective income support for people whose jobs were threatened, emergency food supplies, temporary housing for the homeless, protection from eviction, as well as moratoria on some mortgage payments. Countries in the region have also taken steps towards addressing the heightened vulnerability of prisoners and other persons deprived of liberty to the COVID-19 pandemic, including adopting alternatives to imprisonment and initiating early release programs, have implemented community support programs, and improvised Zoom schools. However, much more needs to be done. There is an enormous range of work ahead, and much of it will rest on global solidarity and cooperation, regional and national. And this brings me to a second lesson of COVID-19, that of inclusion and participation. COVID-19 pandemic has seen a clampdown on freedom of expression in parts of the Asia Pacific, including by way of further tightening of censorship under laws on cybersecurity, anti-terrorism, fake news, sedition, and other legislation. Arrests for expressing discontent or allegedly spreading false information through the press and social media, including reprisals against health workers who report on social media about the conditions they work in or lack of adequate protection equipment, have been reported in the region. As noted by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, in these times of great uncertainty, medical professionals, journalists, human rights defenders, and the general public must be allowed to express opinion on vitally important topics of public interest, such as the provision of healthcare and the handling of the health and socio-economic crisis, and the distribution of relief items. Any action taken to stop the spread of false information must be proportionate, serve a legitimate public health objective, and should be the least intrusive approach required to achieve the result. Interventions related to the pandemic and recovery must also focus on the needs and experiences of young people and meaningfully include and reflect their voices in the design, implementation, and evaluation of COVID-19 specific measures. In other words, in order to navigate this pandemic, we need more participation by civil society. We need to build up human rights-based systems to protect and cherish the people who are the greatest resource of any country and the only bottom line that really counts. And this is where we draw linkages to the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. The vast majority of the SDGs and targets correspond to legally binding human rights commitments made by every member state. Efforts to eradicate poverty, to ensure education for all, guarantees of universal health care, when everyone has equal access to opportunity and choice, are steps towards enabling people to claim their rights and upholding the core pledge of the 2030 Agenda to leave no one behind. We also cannot ignore the worst human rights threat we are facing, climate change. To recover better and prevent future global shocks, including viral pandemics, it is critical to protect the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Some argue that the environment has enjoyed temporary relief from overexploitation and pollution owing to widespread lockdowns and reductions in human activity and energy use. However, in most cases, the short-term focus on supporting local and national economies has come at the expense of the environment, as environmental rules and regulations and their enforcement have been relaxed and financial resources designated for environmental protection have been reallocated. Waivers, exemptions, and relaxations of standard procedures for infrastructure, mining activities, development projects have been granted during the lockdown period, despite their negative environmental impacts, which also pose significant risks to environmental rights, land rights, and rights of indigenous peoples. Excellencies and distinguished participants, the phrase, "we are all in this together," is now more relevant than before. From individuals to governments, from civil society and grassroots communities to the private sector, everyone has a role in building a post-COVID world that is better for present and future generations. We either stand together or fall apart. And with human rights at the heart of the COVID-19 response, we can recover better. On Human Rights Day, let us remind ourselves of the visionary values embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and let us recommit to the principles that made We the Peoples unite 75 years ago to advance justice and peace, human rights and development. Recent weeks have seen extraordinary progress in vaccine development, But vaccine alone cannot resolve the pandemic or heal the damage it has caused. But there is a vaccine to hunger, poverty, inequality, and possibly, if it is taken seriously, to climate change, as well as to many of the other ills that face humanity. It is a vaccine we developed in the wake of previous massive global shocks, including pandemics, financial crisis, and 2 world wars. The name of that vaccine is human rights. Only then can it be said that lessons learned will be drawn from this pandemic and applied to mitigate and prevent any discriminatory impact of the next. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I certainly, like your last verse, that vaccine is human rights. And that's very important. And we'll take note of that. And I hope when we are discussing further with other questions, we will discuss that further. And I will move to the next speaker. Our third speaker is Ms. Alison Low Jia Wen, President of the Petaling Jaya Child Council and also the President of the Children Consultative Council under the Office of the Children Commissioner. When the office started our operation in 1st September, we first do consultation with children and later we set up the Children Consultative Councils to work together with the Office of the Children Commissioner and to discuss various issues involving children. Ms. Alison, the 17-year-old Alison aspires to create a more equitable community for children across Malaysia. Energetic by nature, she's an ardent advocate for children's rights and enjoy socializing with her peers. And she has been working as president of the Petaling Jaya Children Council, an initiative by the Petaling Jaya City Council to make Petaling Jaya the first UNICEF certified child-friendly city in Malaysia. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Ms. Alison, and she will talk about challenges and problems faced by children. This is voices of children herself during the pandemic and children's wish list in order to survive the pandemic and to recover better, and also how as children that the adaptation to the new normals have affected her life. Ms. Alison.
Thank you, Prof. For some reason, I cannot seem to start my video on the Zoom app, so I'll just be talking. So thank you, Prof. A very good morning to everyone. My name is Alison Low, and I'm currently 17 years old. Today, I'll be speaking about how children can survive and recover better from the pandemic. So first and foremost, amidst the ongoing pandemic, children have been experiencing prolonged screen time, which includes a lot of online surfing. And this is actually pretty worrying because when children go online nowadays, the majority of us tend to overlook the dangers of the cyber world. For instance, the possibility of us being a victim of cyber grooming. However, we get so itched by boredom, curiosity, and loneliness. All these factors collectively contribute to the alarming issue of the cybersecurity of children online amidst the pandemic. Next, I would like to bring up hindered productivity among children. The pandemic crashed upon us without much alarm and has shifted all academic studies online. This has taken a major impact on children, some due to poor network connectivity, as their households only subscribe to limited data plans, which became a limiting factor when it comes to online lessons, which include the playing of videos or the switching on of web cameras. Others, due to uninteresting classes which lack interaction between students and the teachers. All of this has shown to collectively lead to hinder the academic progressions of children. With such poor progression, along with the ever-piling homework loads teachers have been assigning to children, it is no surprise that there has been an increasing amount of pressure and stress among children. Consequently, children feel more and more dejected when we carry out our daily obligations. Some of us even disrupting our sleeping and eating patterns with unhealthy behaviors, as we just constantly feel out of place. Such unhealthy behaviors might actually come off unpleasing to many parents, as they view that their children are just lazy. And such assumptions might unleash havoc within the household, resulting in child abuse in a verbal, emotional, and sometimes physical form, which can be very scarring to its children. I would like to follow up with children's wish lists in order to survive the pandemic and recover better. In correlation to what I have shared previously, us, children, firstly wish for a safer life online. I'm glad that the Our Lives Online report done by UNICEF previously has brought this issue into the spotlight. Childline Foundation's Bijak Online initiative has also brought attention to the general audience regarding this matter. And that is great. So we hope that more initiatives are taken upon to refine our lives online. To tackle the negative impacts of online schooling, I suggest NGOs and the Education Ministry to provide stable Wi-Fi connections to children whose households have been running on limited data plans to ensure smooth running of classes. Additionally, we believe that the aid of digital instruments would be a major step towards online education for households with many children. As many of my younger peers have been facing boredom, we truly do hope that more healthy and educational online workshops are to be conducted to keep us entertained, all while instilling essential knowledge within us. For example, UNICEF's Kida Connect platform has been hosting Teens Takeover sessions, which are hosted by children to teach and share about soft skills such as baking and so on. Besides, our PJ Child Council is also planning to conduct workshops revolving the topic of child abuse. Hence, I hope that similar steps are to be taken to enrich the lives of children. At the same time, we hope that schools make decisions with the best interests of the child in mind. Moderate homework loads should be assigned to ensure that students grasp the knowledge of the topic, all while not stressing us out excessively. Most importantly, we hope that open communication is practiced well between parents and children. And by this, we mean two-way communication. Parents, we understand that this is a difficult time for us all, and we are going through our very own struggles too. So please be patient with us as to how we would do the same to you. Last but not least, regarding our adaptation to the new normal, kita jaga kita. So as we're getting through this pandemic together, beside wearing face masks, social distancing, and constantly sanitizing, in adaptation to the new normal, we view it very important that we help each other out whenever possible. In the new normal, we see an increasing need for adults and children to be more understanding towards one another. Alas, let's recover better and rebuild together, all while no child is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pity that we are not able to see your beautiful young face, because I know, I don't know why we are not able to see you on the video, but thank you very much, Alison, for your very, to me, it's very interesting that your most important issues that affect you during COVID-19 is the online, and the request is to have a safer online facilities for children. Before then, I will now proceed to the fourth speaker, and so that we'll have... You can on your video. At least we can see your face. Yeah. And we are going to go on with our fourth speaker. Our fourth speaker is Mr. Jufri Johar. Mr. Jufri Johar is current president of the Malaysian Youth Council, Majlis Belia Malaysia. And he's also an activist with the Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, ABIM. And he is also the founder, chairman of the Federasi Kebangsaan Pekerja Belia, and also the board member of the Commonwealth Alliance of Youth Workers Association. And his recent appointment is he's also a member of the Committee on Promotion, mempromosi persefahaman dan keharmonian antara penganut agama, and also a panel perunding kepada pencegahan rasuah Malaysia. And also there's a lot of a board member of International Youth Centre Kuala Lumpur and Institute Penyelidikan Belia Malaysia. So without further ado, I call upon Mr. Jufri, and he will speak on the various issues, including youth response to COVID-19 and also the role of youth in advancing human rights in Malaysia. Mr. Jufri.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Dato, respected colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having Malaysian Youth Council to be part of this important event. It is a great pleasure to have such a great avenue to propose ideas on best practices from youth leader and youth worker perspective, with the view of bringing improvement to the existing laws and regulations, as well as the structure and system related to the protection of human rights in Malaysia. This is indeed a big recognition to the youth movement and part of right of the youth to be consulted in the matter affected them most, especially in the era of pandemic. This is also a dream of Malaysian Youth Council and other youth leaders to achieve the highest level of decision-making, that is adult youth decision-making, as according to Roger Hart level of participation. We want our youth to get involved in offering their ideas forth in such crucial and serious stuff like human rights, like what we discussed today. Youth are always chanting that they want spaces, platform, voices to be heard, and their issues to be dealt with. Most importantly, they also want their roles and contributions towards nation building to be recognized and appreciated, especially by the governments. This is in fact basic rights of the youth. We usually hear in the mass media on the role of young people or any group in the society to protect human rights. I am pleased to be invited in this forum and to talk about the role of youth in advancing human rights. We had lifted one level ahead, whereby youth are no longer only promoting, but in fact advancing human rights. Advancing means move forward in purposeful way and make or cause to make progress. Now, advancing human rights might still include advocacy, awareness, and creating discussions around the many areas of human rights, which all include in protecting human rights. However, I think the emphasis on implementation and thinking about the steps needed to be done in the future. Of course, it means that youth are the main anchor and actor, because we have almost half the population of Malaysia are young people. The key player to ensure all segments of human rights as enshrined in our constitution with cross-reference to UDHR, OIC, and ASEAN Human Rights Declaration are well understood in the society, especially among the youngsters. When we talk about the role of youth, it combines the responsibility of young people. To do that, it's best for me to share the significant contributions of young people in advancing human rights. Due to the time constraint, I wish to highlight one or two things only that had been done by Malaysian Youth Council as an umbrella body for all youth, multi-ethnic, multi-races, multi-tendency. MBM consistently advancing human rights in the light of youth rights. Many people talk about general human rights. We talk about women's rights, people with disability rights, Aboriginal people rights, and children rights, but tend to forget youth rights. Even though the definition of youth somehow or rather encroach in part of children definition, 15 to 18 years old. However, for this purpose, we are more referring for those who are between 18 to 35 years old, as according to our National Youth Policy and Youth Society and Youth Development Act 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, youth mainstreaming. Youth mainstreaming in development planning and policy is a key part of the long-term commitment of Malaysian Youth Council to working with young people to championing their rights and develop broad-based strategies to incorporate their capacities, participation and interest in the youth sector and beyond. In this regard, Malaysian Youth Council adopted a right-based approach where it perceives young people as right holders and the state and all institutions as duty bearers. Commonwealth defined youth mainstreaming as strategies for intergenerational equity and justice that enable young people's capabilities, participation and human right to be an integral dimension of the analysis, design, implementation and monitoring and evaluation of policies and program in intersectoral planning across all social, political, economic spheres. Is enable our young people and adults to benefit equally from and contribute equally to development's outcomes. The key point in youth mainstreaming is voice, participation, representation, and empowerment so that youth can bring their ideas, issues, aspiration to the highest level of decision making and to be heard of by the government. I believe that youth mainstreaming, as promoted by Malaysian Youth Council and entity like Commonwealth Youth Secretariat, I believe that is in line with the spirit of United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child. As umbrella for all youth organizations, we are multi-ethnic, as I mentioned earlier, multi-races, including Sabah and Sarawak, including Disabled Youth Council, Aboriginal People Youth Council. MBM is responsible to ensure youth voice to be heard at all levels, especially in the various national decision-making platforms like Parliament, National Consultative Youth Council, chaired by our Minister of Youth and Sport, National Action Council on cost of living, NACOL, under the Ministry of Domestic Affairs and Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, and also the most recent one that we are fighting for to be in is Majlis Pekerjaan Negara, to voice out on behalf of the young people about their grievances on losing job, unemployment, mismatch, and so on. So we try to, bring all the grievances of the youth at the grassroots level up to the highest authority platform like Majlis Pekerjaan Negara will be due chaired by our Prime Minister. In the era of pandemic, Malaysian Youth Council becoming in collaboration, of course, with our close partner, National Student Consultative Council, a group of young leaders in the university, becoming a mediator to collect all grievances, including their grievances towards losing of job, unemployment, mismatch, posted by our youth to be sent to Economic Council, Action Council, via Minister of Youth and Sport. So we bring and we accumulate, we assemble all the grievances, ideas, aspiration, and their problem to be sent directly to Economic Action Council during the pandemic period. In more serious matters, Malaysian Youth Council and its affiliate members, comprising of 40 main youth organizations nationwide, used to offer ideas from youth perspective in Senate Reform Caucus, Election Reform Agenda, Political Finance Committee, and Universal Periodic Review Report. We get involved in those important matters discussed by our government and government agency. Apart from bringing the youth voice, Malaysian Youth Council is providing and sending them to various direct platforms to voice out by themselves, such as Youth Parliament, Majlis Penasihat Anak Muda Berkepakaran kepada Perdana Menteri that we proposed just recently, and Prime Minister agreed to have one. We are in the mood of discussing with the Ministry of Youth and Sport to have this Majlis Penasihat Anak Muda Berkepakaran kepada Perdana Menteri, because there are no one youth reps in the cabinet. So this Majlis Penasihat Anak Muda Berkepakaran tends to bring all the best 10 youth to working closely with the Prime Minister. And others like Youth Group for International Affairs and Diplomacy under Wisma Putra during Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah era, and not to forget to mention our representative in Majlis Konsultasi Kanak-Kanak, Adik Azman Azim, as the Ketua Junior of Malaysian Youth Council. all of them has chances to speak on behalf youth and the rakyat, especially in the era of pandemic. Furthermore, MBM is fighting for more youth to be given more chance to fielded as candidates in the next general election as way out to the current political turmoil. Ladies and gentlemen, my last part of my presentation, my speech, youth right. While I just share an example to the efforts to advance human rights in youth organization, I found the right to participation, right to have space, right for internet access as the third utility, right to be unleashed their potential as significant to youth in Malaysia. Why it is important as well for youth to work together to protect NGOs' freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association collectively. By saying collectively, we hope that our fellow youth will want to engage further in youth organization, groups, and collaborative activities. Finally, the way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, there is a need for a collective and better understanding of what youth mainstreaming involves, how it can be implemented effectively for all youth. Finally, to further strengthening the role of youth in advancing human rights, Malaysian Youth Council would like to make some recommendations as follows. We have 4 recommendations. The first one, to recognize youth movement as an efficacy informal platform for informal education, especially in educating the youth about human rights as a feeder to the formal education in school and in university and college. Secondly, to consider qualified youth leader to be appointed as one of the SUHAKAM commissioner if it is not too demanding for the next tenure to secure youth are represented or at least to have special youth section under SUHAKAM or to be incorporated into Child Commissioner Office under Dato Hazia. Thirdly, to have and recognize youth right charter such as right to participation, right to have spaces, right for internet access, right to be unleashed their potential, etc., etc., etc. Maybe we can, work on this youth right charter to be recognized and to be proclaimed by our government. Last but not least, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to include youth rep in every decision-making process platform at all levels so that the youth have a proper channel to post their ideas and problem because they are most affected during pandemic era. With that, in short, full and effective youth participation in society in decision making. With that, I end my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jufitri. I'm sorry I pronounced your name wrongly just now, Jufitri. And of course, you are welcome to join OCC in terms of giving views and ideas. And we welcome everyone to actually collaborate in relation to rights of children. And of course, it's very difficult when you're talking about youth, it's age 15 to 30, yeah. And then of course you were saying that because the 15 to 18 is actually catered for under CRC children, and of course 18 above actually is the normal human rights issues. And of course we have been looking at a lot of these issues in SUHAKAM itself, and bearing in mind that issues of children are quite specific, but of course youth issues are also quite general in terms, but because of the age gap, and always it always happened. That's why your wish list is like to recognize, to have a special committee to advise the Prime Minister on youth, because when you're 18 to like 20 to 25, you're still considered young, and that's probably is the difficulties. But I think it is important to note some of the points that you have said. But again, I'm also, when looking at the children's wish list done by Alison, there are also things that she actually mentioned in terms of being safe online, but she also talks about empowering children. We are now at the Office of the Children Commissioner is to empower children. People like children like Alison will go into to become a youth and will become a youth activist later on, and to actually work hand in hand with children as well. And I think I'm going to go straight to some of the questions that have been asked online. The first question is to Ministry, to our Deputy Secretary. The question to Mr. Colony, the question is it possible to share to the Ministry of Women, Community Development, is it possible to share the statistic related to child abuse since MCO in March received by JKM, and would like to see that the ministries as the lead ministry for children to lead coalition of disaggregated data with police, JKM, and Ministry of Health. Is that Mr. Colony? Can you answer that?
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, based on my record here, we have until now we have 4,349 what we call that child abuse cases that have been reported to us. Okay, is either through our welfare departments, but this is not through police, yeah, only through our welfare department, and also through our what we call that is a talian kasih. We have this talian kasih. So all in is 4,349 cases for both female and male. Okay, and there's among the highest. I think the type of abuse here, we have physical abuse, sexual abuse, and then we also have emotional abuse, neglected, and those who are abandoned child, and then baby abandons and others. Okay, for females, they have recorded around 1,263 cases for sexual abuse for this period. I need to say that for this year, 2020. Okay, so it's quite high. So, and then in terms of violence, domestic violence, what we have here, there are increasings of 2,287 cases of domestic violence. Okay, these ones also reported, have been reported through our talian kasih 15999, 2,287 all in. Okay, that's all in terms of the data that we have.
That's alarming. I think it's quite a big number of cases being reported in your talian kasih, the 4,349 cases. Then when you split it up, I mean, my worry is again on the sexual abuse cases, the 1,263. And of course, that relates to the next question, I think, in relation to there's one question online that I would like to address: the urgent need to combat mental health illness among children and youth, especially at school and at home. How should we work on this? And the thing is, during COVID-19, there's, I think, not only physical abuse, but also mental abuse, and whereby children are actually, children and families are under stress because they were not able to go out. And some families have very limited space, when they're living in certain houses. And these are something that I think we need to handle really carefully. And I don't know, maybe again, Mr. Colony could answer that question. What are the ministries, plan, or doing during this time when you receive a complaint or a call on 15999 on issue of mental health issues, emotional abuse and things like that? What do you do, and how do you actually help these children?
So far we have received a complaint related to mental health illness from seafarers. From seafarers, these are the new, during this COVID. So what we did, and now on we have to work with Ministry of Health in terms of this case. So I think for the children itself, we will work together with Ministry of Health to combat this matter.
Is there anything that the ministry is doing? How, when there's a call, what do you do? Were they given taken to the hospital and be given counseling and psychiatric help?
Yes. That's why we need those who are working in our, for example, the talian kasih itself. we receive the talent cluster from the department itself. At the same time, for those who are reported their case and then they go to our Anjong Kasih, for example, either Anjong Kasih or Anjong Singgah, this kind of things, we will bring them to the hospital. Those are abuse cases. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The next question is that I seek asylum in UNCHR Malaysia. I appeal, solicit, explore, and beg for your generosity, clemency, and chivalry to salvage me from the calamity. The adversity, tribulation, and stressing situation. I seek asylum since 2015 till now, and there is no progress in my case to transfer to IOM. I know there are many hindrances and barriers precisely after Trump administration, but please try your best exertion to find solution to all refugees that have been suffering from their bad conditions. Fortunately, I have completed my postgraduate here and really appreciate to the government of Malaysia to allow me to complete my study of PhD without any problem, but I will suffer the next year from invalid visa. Therefore, please highlight about this dilemma of visa of refugees. And I know the government was a kindness heart if someone knocked the door to resolve this dilemma. Thank you very much. This is a question from Mr. Muhammad. I think I would open it to anyone who would be able to answer this, and maybe again from the Ministry of Women, because you said you also look after refugees. He is talking about what happened to him after he finished his PhD, and then his visa will expire.
I think for this case, I don't think I can answer it because the refugee that I mentioned just now is related to those who need protection, temporary protections. When they come to us, we will help them. But this case is related to education, right?
Actually,
also
not to education, because he's here and as a refugee, and has been able to finish his PhD, but he's worried that as soon as he finishes PhD, where is he going and what will happen to him? But maybe Ms. Shivani would like to answer that. Would you be able to answer that question? Thank you. You unmute. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I think the situation and plight of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, undocumented workers, people on the move, is not something unique to Malaysia. It's a challenge, as I mentioned, we've been witnessing globally. And at the Malaysia country level, I'm aware that UNHCR and IOM have been actively working on supporting asylum seekers, refugees, also in terms of ensuring access to basic services, healthcare during the movement restriction period. It's very difficult to give a direct answer to the person, because I think we know that at the country level there is a commitment from the UN country team as a whole, from UNHCR as a whole. They're engaging with the relevant line ministries. They're looking at mitigating the impact of COVID-19 on the situation that migrants and asylum seekers find themselves in. And I think as a very essential step, of course, the UN country team and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has prioritized protection concerns of migrants, undocumented workers, and asylum seekers. So I would say that issues of violations of their rights, access to services, are something which are being looked at. But if there are specific individual concerns, then I think it's important to bring those to the attention of UNHCR colleagues who are already working very actively. We also know that UNHCR is not operating in isolation. They work very closely with civil society groups. And I think once again, I emphasize the importance of inclusion and participation of civil society in giving responses. And I'd just like to end by saying that the challenge of this pandemic is something that the world has not seen before. And hence it requires, the solution to it cannot be with states alone. It requires all to engage equally and actively. And I think this is where, and I know SUHAKAM is also working has a very strong program on looking at issues related to asylum seekers and refugees. So I think we need to continue to have that concerted approach to address some of these issues. And I also see there is a subsequent question on the rights of children, refugee children, Rohingya children, education. And I think this is something, again, which we have dedicated agencies in Malaysia. You have UNICEF, there's WHO, there's UNHCR, who are looking at addressing some of these challenges. So.
Thank you very much. I just, because time is running out, but I'm going to read this one question to Ms. Allison. The question is, I find it interesting that you centered your speech on children's lives online. Could I ask why you choose this narrative and why is it important? Allison.
It's actually pretty simple. It's because during this pandemic, everyone is stuck at home. So instead of going to school and meeting our friends, we spend more time online. We spend most of our time online. So I find that the safety of children online is actually pretty essential nowadays to make sure that we're not exploited in any way online without our consent. That answer the question?
Okay. Yes. I mean, do you get information from your friends that they are also serving online and other website, and that's what worries you most, and that's why you're asking for a safer online for children? Okay. Thank you very much, Allison. And there's a question. Let me see. What is the specific strategic plan your council will take to improve the livelihood of the vulnerable youth? This question is from Datuk Lok, and this is for specific strategic plan. This is from Mr. Jufiri. Could you answer that question, Jufitri?
Thank you, Datuk. Thank you for the questions. So our priority in Malaysian Youth Council to be inclusive, so that during my tenure, after I'm taking office after 2018, we are focusing more on vulnerable and minority young people, especially when we revive again the Gabungan Belia Sikh Malaysia. We try to empower them back to our national platform, and we managed to empower them and bring back them to the national platform in Malaysian Youth Council. And then we are in the mood of, establishing a Disabled Youth Council led by a bunch of very brilliant disabled young people. And at the same time, we try to, try to be inclusive, and we try to reach as many as possible youth group, especially in Sabah and Sarawak, and we put high interest on hearing youth voice and concern, especially from Sabah and Sarawak. And last but not least, we are also establishing one group to cater on the mental health issues. We collaborate with NGO called Scopus to train more young people to be a professional helper to help our young people to deal with this challenging mental health issue, especially during the pandemic era. Thank you, Dato'.
Thank you very much. I think I will have to wrap up. There's one question for Allison. What are your insights to how COVID-19 has impacted on children's life? You want to answer that, Allison, being the child speaker today?
I guess I kind of said it in my speech, but I guess I can share again. So education has been very hard on our side because schools have been planning exams and giving us last-minute notices. And this has indeed taken a toll for us, especially for the SPM batch. They postponed SPM and now they're having online trial exams, which they only just notified us about. So it's getting very stressful because they don't have proper procedures and instructions, so we're kind of lost. Okay. And of course, I would like to stress on the mental well-being of children nowadays.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alison. I think if I could just wrap up and summarize some of the issues, and I think in relation to youth, in particular for children who, that are sitting for the exams, and also in relation to education, there's a lot of things that have been said in relation to their anxieties, their worries about education per se. And also we are also worried, the Office of Children Commissioner at SUHAKAM, we have done 5-6 dialogues with children, including those in Sabah and Sarawak. And the major issues that was discussed and were pointed out by children, one is on education, and they find that online learning is very difficult, and some do not even have the facilities to do it. And from there's a report done by, I think, UNICEF Family on Age, yeah, and that actually stated that because they were doing a survey, and in Kuala Lumpur itself, 8 out of 10 children that are now doing online schooling were saying that they will not continue to go to school next year because of the problems. If we're going to continue with online teaching, they're going to be dropped out from the school system. And this is worrying. And of course, with those who actually are able to do it online are facing problems like what Alison is talking about. They are also serving other lines, and they are exposing themselves to various risks being online for children. And the other issues that I think that's very important for us today in trying to get better and to recover better, to recover better and also to rebuild together, is how the ministries should work together. Ministry of Women being the main ministry to look after children, and also Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Health, because issue of refugees, children are within that. And of course, in education, it is the Ministry of Education that will have to look into all these issues and must try and listen to what these children are saying. And I hope, Mr. Yufitri, in relation to youth, you would be able to say something that your group of pakar to advise the Prime Minister to look into all these issues, because it is very important and it needs to get to all the various ministries. Because as far as youth and children are concerned, there are at least 5 ministries that have to look after them and be able to collaborate and give the best interests of children as a priority. With that, thank you for listening. I now hand over to our Mr. MC, Mr. Daniel. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much to panelists and the moderators for handling the 2 sessions very well. It is indeed a fruitful discussion on the need for us to rebuild and recover together post-COVID-19. I wish to take this opportunity once again to express our appreciation to both our moderators and the panelists involved in both sessions. We hope that the discussions have benefited the audience. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have almost come to the end of our Human Rights Day Forum. Before we close our event today, I have the honor and pleasure to invite Datuk Taqiyuddin bin Hassan, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, to deliver his closing remarks and to close the forum officially.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning, everyone. Honorable Datuk Sri Hishamuddin bin Tun Hussein, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, Honorable Tan Sri Osman bin Hashim, Chairman of Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, His Excellency Mr. Stephen Prisner, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei Darussalam. Salam sejahtera and salam Malaysia prihatin to all distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to deliver this closing address at the International Human Rights Day 2020 Virtual Forum. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my utmost appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MoFA, Legal Affairs Division, Prime Minister's Department, BHEUU, Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, and the United Nations in Malaysia, UNCT, for organizing this meaningful event. On 10 December 1948, the United Nations General Assembly officially adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The declaration is an important milestone in the history of mankind, as it recognizes all humans as being born free and equal in dignity and rights, regardless of their race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. I very much appreciate the theme of today's forum, Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. This is particularly relevant as the world is faced with such unprecedented crisis that has tested us all in so many ways. It is indeed important for us to stand up together and face this pandemic in unity, helping those in need and the hardest to be hit, especially the vulnerable group. It is also more important than ever that we stand up for humankind and uphold the very principle of human rights so that no one group affected by this pandemic is left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, the government has been managing this pandemic with a bird's eye view of all those affected and how problems can be mitigated. This management also includes prioritizing the needs of the people by providing the necessary assistance and financial aid to those impacted by the pandemic through various initiatives under the Economic Stimulus Package and Budget 2021. Socio-economic and legislative frameworks have been developed to assist the rakyat to cope with this unpredictable and volatile situation. While we are handling the situation, we also know that the current predicament may remain longer than anticipated. This is when we need to ensure that we comply with all rules and regulations and protect each other from spread of this virus. We need to make adjustments and adapt to the new normal of living, working and doing business. However, this new normal should not compromising human rights and rights to a decent life. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all frontliners who are working very hard every day to keep us safe, valuing the importance of every life in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this forum has been a fruitful one for all of you. I understand the constraints of having a virtual forum, as it may not be as extravagant as we hope. Nevertheless, having a platform of esteemed panelists and speakers who are able to share their experiences and knowledge is indeed a blessing. Lastly, allow me to extend my sincere appreciation to all panelists and speakers, the organizing committee, and all of you here today for your support in making this event a meaningful one. I humbly call upon each of us to stay united and continue our efforts in overcoming this national crisis. Stand up for human rights, and let's move forward for a better tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato'. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with the closing address, we have come to the end of our event. Thank you all very much for your participation and contribution to the discussions and for making Human Rights Day 2020 a huge success. Have a pleasant afternoon and stay safe. Bye.